The wedding ceremony lasted exactly 12 minutes. Commander Tavok Venus counted. Every second, he stood in the great hall of the Imperial flagship dressed in the ceremonial armor of his ancestors and watched the human woman walk toward him. She was small, all humans were small. Her brown hair was pulled back from her face and she wore the simple white dress that her people favored for such occasions. She moved with quiet grace, her eyes forward, her expression calm. Torvik felt nothing but cold duty. Valoran Empire had ruled a 100-star systems for 10,000 years. His family line stretched back to the founding wars, when his ancestors had conquered worlds and built an empire from blood and fire. Now that empire needed peace with the humans of Earth, and peace required sacrifice. The Galactic Senate had broken the treaty. The terms were simple: Earth would join the alliance, the Valorans would share their technology, and approve that both species could live as one. A marriage would bind them together. Torvik had been chosen. He had not volunteered. The woman stopped before him. Her name was Lara Mitchell. She was a diplomatic attached, whatever that meant. She was also a former Marine, which meant she had served in her planet's military. Torvik found this slightly interesting. Humans were not known for their warriors. They were known for their short lives, their fragile bodies, and their strange tendency to feel emotions too deeply. The priest spoke the ancient words. Tuvok repeated them without feeling. Elver repeated them in a steady voice. When it was done, they were married. The assembled nobles applauded politely. Torvik saw the looks they exchanged behind their hands. He heard the whispers they thought he could not hear. Bonded to a creature that will die before his first century ends. The great Venus line reduced to this. She is pretty enough, I suppose, for a human. Torvik kept his face still. He had expected this. He had prepared for the humiliation. What he had not prepared for was the way Lara turned to him after the ceremony, looked directly into his eyes, and said, "Thank you for doing this." He did not know how to respond. He simply nodded and walked away. The days that followed were strange and uncomfortable. Lav had been given quarters near his own. She did not demand his time or attention. She did not weep or complain. She simply existed in his space, quiet and watchful like a small animal observing a predator. Torvik told himself he did not care what she did. He focused on his duties. The alliance with Earth was fragile, and there were many who wished to see it fail. The Kethari, a brutal insectoid species from the Outer Rim, had been raiding border colonies for months. War was coming, and Torvik needed to prepare. He saw Laura at formal dinners and diplomatic functions. She sat beside him as his wife, eating little, speaking less. When nobles addressed her, she answered in simple, careful sentences. When they ignored her, she did not seem to notice. One evening, Admiral Catherine, an old friend of Tuvok's father, approached them at a reception. "So this is the human," Kefron said, examining Lara like she was an interesting specimen. "Tell me, child, what do you hope to gain from this marriage?" Laura looked at him calmly. "I hope to prevent a war, Admiral." Catherine laughed. "Prevent a war? You? How would a creature like you prevent anything?" "By being here," LRA said. "By showing that our species can live together, by being patient." Catherine snorted and walked away. Torvik expected Lara to be angry or embarrassed. Instead, she simply returned to her Meal, does it not bother you? Torv asked later when they were alone. The way they speak to you, Lava considered. The question, they do not know me, she said. Why would their words hurt me? Torvek did not have an answer. 2 weeks after the wedding, the distress signal came. Torvek was on the bridge when the communication arrived. A colony on Dezur Prime was under attack. Kevi raiders had breached the orbital defenses and landed. Ground forces, thousands of civilians, were trapped. The local garrison was overwhelmed. Tarvek moved immediately. He gathered his officers, assembled a response team, and prepared to depart. Within the hour, he did not think about Lara until she appeared at the shuttle bay, dressed in a simple uniform, a medical kit over her shoulder. What are you doing here? He demanded. I'm coming with you, she said. This is a combat mission. You are not trained for this. I was a combat medic for 6 years, Larva said. I have treated wounds under fire. I have saved lives while enemies shot at me. I am coming with you. Torvik wanted to refuse. He wanted to send her back to her quarters where she would be safe and out of his way, but something in her eyes stopped him. There was no fear there, no hesitation, just quiet certainty. You will stay with the rear guard, he said finally. You will not engage the enemy. You will follow orders. Understood, Lara said. The shuttle launched. Torv sat with his officers, reviewing tactical data, planning their approach. Lara sat alone in the back, checking her medical supplies, her face unreadable. Tav told himself she would be fine. He told himself she would stay safe in the rear, treating minor wounds, far from any real danger. He was wrong. As the shuttle descended through Dezur Prime's atmosphere, Torvik looked at the woman he had married. She was staring out the window at the burning colony below. Her hands steady, her breathing calm. He did not know it yet, but everything was about to change. The flames of Thesser Prime reflected in Lara Mitchell's eyes, and somewhere deep inside her, something ancient and terrible began to wake. The colony was burning. Tavek led his team through the shattered streets of Vesser Prime. Buildings had collapsed. Bodies lay in the rubble. The air smelled of smoke and blood and something worse. The Kethi were not just raiders. They were hunters. They enjoyed the feat of their prey. Laura stayed close behind him, her medical kit ready, her eyes scanning the destruction. Torvak had assigned 2 soldiers to guard her. He did not want to worry about the human woman while he was trying to save his people. The evacuation point is 3 blocks north, Tavek said through his communicator. All units converge. We get the civilians out first. They move through the ruins. Somewhere ahead, plasma fire crackled. Screams echoed through the empty streets. The Kafir were close. Torvak reached the evacuation point and found chaos. Hundreds of civilians huddled in a damaged building, terrified and wounded. His medics were already overwhelmed. There were not enough shuttles. There were not enough soldiers. There was not enough time. Get them moving, Torvik ordered. Wounded first, children next. Everyone else follows. He turned to check on Lara and found her already working. She had dropped to her knees beside a wounded child, her hands moving with practice speed as she treated a deep gash across the boy's chest. Child was Valorant, 3 times her age. But Lara spoke to him softly, calmly, as if they were old friends. Tavek watched for a moment, then he turned away and returned to the battle. The Kethi attacked. 20 minutes later, they came From the east, a swarm of clicking, chittering monsters with black shells and razor-sharp limbs, the Valoran soldiers met them with plasma rifles and desperate courage. Torvik fought at the front, cutting down enemy after enemy, his blade singing through the air, but there were too many. Eastern sector has been breached, a voice crackled through his communicator. They are flanking us. Repeat. Eastern sector is compromised. Torvik cursed. The eastern sector was where he had sent Lara. He had stationed her in a medical tent, far from the main battle, supposedly safe. All units report status of the human attack. He commanded, static, then a broken voice. Sir, the medical tent was overrun. We lost contact with her guards. We do not know where she is. Torvik felt something cold grip his chest. It was not love. He did not love this woman, but she was his responsibility. She was under his protection, and he had failed her. He fought his way toward the eastern sector, killing Kethvi as he went. His soldiers followed. The battle raged around them, fire and blood and screaming death. When he reached the medical tent, he found only bodies. Laura's guards lay dead, torn apart by Kafir claws. The wounded who had been receiving treatment were gone, and Lara was nowhere to be found. Search the area, Torvik commanded. Find her. They searched. They found nothing. Torvik was about to order a wider sweep when his communicator crackled again. Commander, we are receiving reports from a defensive position 2 blocks east. Someone is holding a line against the Kethari. They say it is a human female. Torvik ran. He found her in the ruins of a collapsed warehouse. The building had fallen in such a way that it created a natural choke point, a narrow passage that could be defended by a small force. Lavra had gathered the survivors from the medical tent, perhaps 30 wounded soldiers and a dozen terrified children, and brought them here. She stood at the entrance to the passage, a Kethari blade in her hands. 3 dead Kefuri lay at her feet. Her uniform was torn and soaked with blood, some of it hers, most of it not. Her face was pale but calm. More Kefuri were coming. Torvik could hear them clicking in the darkness. Hold this position, Lavra said to the wounded soldiers behind her. Do not let them through. Then she walked forward to meet the enemy. Torvik watched in disbelief as the small human woman charged into a group of Keth warriors. Twice her size, she moved with a speed and precision he had never seen. She ducked under slashing claws, drove her stolen blade into joints and weak points, used the bodies of falling enemies as shields against their companions. She was not just fighting. She was surviving. Every movement was efficient, brutal, calculated. She did not waste energy on fear or hesitation. She simply killed and killed and killed. Torvik finally remembered how to move. He rushed forward with his soldiers and joined the battle. Together they pushed the Kethvari back. The enemy retreated, confused by the ferocity of the resistance. When it was over, Torvik stood in the blood-soaked ruins and looked at Lara. Mitchell dodged. She was still standing barely. A deep wound in her side was bleeding freely. Her left arm hung at a wrong angle. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, but she was still standing. The children, she said. Are the children safe? They are safe, Torvik said. Lavra nodded. Then her eyes rolled back and she collapsed. Torvik caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing in his arms. She was so small, so fragile. And yet she had done what trained Valoran warriors could not. She had held the line. She had saved lives. Get a medic, Torvik commanded. Now he carried her back to the evacuation point. Himself, his soldiers watched in silence. The wounded she had saved watched with something like awe. Later, when the battle was over and the colony was secured, Tarv sat beside Laura's medical pod and waited for her to wake. The doctors said she would recover. They said she had lost a dangerous amount of blood. They said it was a miracle she had survived. Torvik did not believe in miracles. He believed in strength and will and the refusal to die. He looked at the sleeping woman and saw her for the first time, not a political burden, not a fragile creature, something else entirely. When Lara finally opened her eyes, Tarvik was still there. You should have told me you could fight, he said. Lara smiled weakly. You never asked. For the first time since their wedding, Tarvik found himself smiling back. Word spread quickly through the Valoran fleet. In the mess halls and barracks, soldiers whispered about the human woman who had killed 3 Cathari warriors with a stolen blade. In the Offix quarters, commanders discussed the reports with disbelief and growing curiosity. In the noble courts, those who had mocked Torvik's marriage suddenly fell silent. Elver recovered slowly. The wound in her side had been deeper, and even with advanced Valoran medicine, she needed time to heal. Torv visited her every day. He told himself it was duty. He told himself he was simply checking on a member of his crew. He knew he was lying. Tell me about Earth, he said one evening, sitting beside her medical pod. Lara looked at him with tired eyes. What do you want? To know everything. I want to understand where you came from, what made you into what you are. Larva was quiet for a moment, then she began to speak. She told him about Earth, about a small blue world that had tried to kill its inhabitants since the beginning of time. She told him about ice ages and volcanic eruptions and diseases that wiped out millions. She told him about wars that lasted decades, about weapons that could destroy entire cities, about humans who slaughtered each other over land and resources and ideas. She told him about survival, about how humans had crawled out of caves and built civilizations, about how they had fought and died and kept fighting generation after generation, refusing to surrender to a hostile universe. We are not strong, Larva said, not like your people. We do not live long. We do not heal quickly. We break easily, but we do not stop. We never stop. That is the only thing we know how to do. Torvik listened in silence. He had studied humans before. He had read reports about their biology and psychology, but he had never understood them, not until now. You are Death Worlders, he said slowly. Your planet is a death world. Yes, Elver said. And we are still here. The war with the Kevari grew worse. 3 more colonies fell within a month. The Kessi were spreading across the border systems, burning everything in their path. The Valorian military stretched thin, trying to defend too many worlds with too few ships. Lara healed and returned to duty. She requested assignment to a frontline combat unit as a field medic. Torvik refused. She requested again. He refused again. You almost died, he said. I will not send you back into that. Your people are dying, Lava replied. Every day while you protect me, soldiers bleed out on battlefields because there are not enough medics. Let me help. They argued for 3 days. Lara did not raise her voice. She did Not plead or cry. She simply presented her case again and again with the same quiet certainty she had shown on Decessor Prime. On the fourth day, Torvik relented. He assigned her to the medical corps of the 7th Fleet, stationed on the front lines of the war. He told himself he was making a tactical decision. He told himself he was using resources efficiently. He watched her shuttle depart and felt something he had never felt before. Fear, not fear of battle or death, fear of losing her dog. Lara served with the 7th Fleet for 3 months. Reports came back to Torv regularly. He read everyone she had saved a wounded pilot by dragging him half a kilometer through enemy territory while Kether hunted them. She had performed emergency surgery on a damaged ship, keeping 6 soldiers alive until rescue arrived. She had held a dying soldier's hand and talked to him about his family until he passed, then picked up her rifle and returned to the fight. The soldiers of the 7th Fleet began to call her the Ghost. She was small and quiet and appeared without warning. Wherever she was needed most, she did not command them. She simply worked alongside them, bleeding with them, suffering with them, never complaining, never stopping. Valorian soldiers who had laughed at humans before stopped laughing. They had seen what Larva could do. They had seen the fire in her eyes when she refused to let a patient die. They had seen her stand against the enemy without fear. Tivak watched recordings of her in combat. He studied the way she moved, the way she thought, the way she fought. He saw something ancient in her, something that had existed on Earth long before humans built cities or wrote laws, a survival instinct forged by millions of years of evolution, a refusal to die that went deeper than courage or training. He understood finally why Earth had survived. The Valoran High Command began to change their opinion of humans. They requested detailed files on human military history. They studied human tactics and strategies. They read about wars that had consumed entire continents, about soldiers who had fought to the last breath, about civilians who had resisted occupation for years. Admiral Kron, the same noble who had mocked Lara at the reception, approached Torv one day. "Your wife," Catherine said carefully. "She is not what I expected." "No," Torvik agreed. "She is not. I was wrong about humans. I think we all were." Torvik nodded but said nothing. He had been wrong too. He had married Laura for duty, expecting to tolerate her presence for the sake of the alliance. He had not expected to respect her. He had not expected to admire her. He had not expected to love her. The news came on a cold morning, 3 months after Lara joined the front lines. Intelligence reported that the Cathari were assembling their largest fleet, yet their target was clear. They were coming for the Valoran home world itself. Torvik recalled Lara immediately. She returned to the flagship, thinner than before, with new scars and tired eyes. But when she saw him, she smiled. "I heard about the attack," she said. "What do we do?" Torvik looked at the woman he had married, the woman who had become a legend among his people, the woman who had shown him what strength truly meant. "We fight," he said. "Together." Lara nodded. Together. The fleet prepared for war, and somewhere in the darkness of space, the Kavori Armada began its final approach. The sky above the Valoran home world turned black with enemy ships. Torvik stood on the walls of the capital city and watched the Cathari descend like a Plague, thousands of dropships fell through the atmosphere carrying millions of warriors. The planetary shields held for an hour, then two, then collapsed under the weight of bombardment. The invasion had begun. Lara stood beside him, dressed in combat armor, a plasma rifle in her hands. She had refused to stay in the bunkers with the other civilians. She had refused to hide. This is it, Torvik said. If we fail here, the Empire falls. Then we will not fail, Lara replied. The first wave of Ketheri hit the eastern wall at dawn. They came in endless numbers, climbing over each other, a living tide of black shells and razor claws. The Valoran defenders met them with everything they had, plasma. Fire turned the morning air white. Explosions shook the ancient stones. Tav led his soldiers from the front as he always had. Lara worked behind the lines, treating the wounded, keeping soldiers alive long enough to return to the fight. For 6 hours they held the wall. For 6 hours they pushed back the enemy. Then the Ketheri broke through. They came from a section of wall that had been weakened by orbital bombardment. 1,000 warriors poured through the gap, spreading into the streets, hunting civilians. Torvik rushed to contain the breach. He fought through the enemy, his blades singing, his armor covered in blood, but there were too many. For every Ketheri he killed, 3 more took its place. A warrior twice his size caught him from behind. Claws tore through his armor and into his flesh. Torvik fell, his blood pooling on the ancient stones. His officers dragged him to safety. Medics worked frantically to stop the bleeding. Torvik tried to stand, tried to return to the battle, but his body would not obey. The line, he gasped. Hold the line. His officers exchanged desperate looks. Without their commander, morale would collapse. Without leadership, the defense would crumble. They needed time to reorganize. Time they did not have. Lara appeared at his side. Her armor was dented and scorched. Blood ran down her face from a wound on her forehead, but her eyes were clear. I will hold the line, she said. Torvik grabbed her arm. You cannot. They will kill you. Maybe, Lara said, but not before I kill enough of them to matter. She pulled free and walked toward the breach. The surviving soldiers watched her go. They did not move to follow. She was human. She was an outsider. She had no authority to lead them. Lara stopped at the edge of the breach and looked back. Behind her, Ketheri warriors were still pouring through the gap. Behind her, the sounds of slaughter echoed through the streets. I did not marry your commander to watch his world burn, she said. I did not come this far to die running. Follow me or stay, but I'm going forward. She turned and walked into the enemy. For a moment nothing happened. Then a young soldier stepped forward, then another, then a dozen, then 100. They followed the human woman into hell. What happened next became legend. Lara did not fight like a Valoran. She did not rely on strength or reach or superior training. She fought like a human. She fought dirty. She targeted the Cathor command units, the larger warriors who directed the swarm. She had studied their rigid hierarchy during her months on the front lines. She knew that without their commanders, the lesser warriors would fall into confusion. She led surgical strikes through the enemy formation, hitting command units and retreating before the swarm could react. She used the narrow streets as choke points, forcing the Ketheri to fight on her terms. She turned their numbers against them, making them trip over Their own dead, the Valoran soldiers, followed her commands without question. They had seen her fight, they had seen her bleed, they trusted her. Laura took wounds, a claw opened her arm, a blade cut across her back, plasma fire scorched her leg, she kept fighting. She did not feel the pain, she could not afford to feel anything. Humans called it combat focus, the body's final defense against death. Adrenaline flooded her system, suppressing pain, sharpening senses, pushing her beyond normal limits. She was not thinking anymore, she was simply surviving moment by moment, kill by kill. The Ketheri began to falter. Their commanders were dead, their formations were broken. For the first time since the invasion began, they hesitated. Lara did not hesitate, she pushed forward deeper into the breach, driving the enemy back. Her soldiers followed, screaming war cries in a language she did not understand. The counterattack lasted 4 hours. When it was over, the breach was sealed with enemy dead. Valoran reinforcements arrived at sunset. They found Lara standing on a pile of Ketheri corpses, still holding her rifle, still scanning for threats. Her armor was destroyed. Her body was covered in wounds that should have killed her 3 times over. But she was standing. Torv had recovered enough to walk. He pushed through the crowd of soldiers until he reached her. It is over, he said. You can stop now. Lara looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. For a moment she did not seem to recognize him. Then something shifted in her face. The combat focus faded. The pain came flooding back. The civilians, she whispered, are they safe? They are safe, you saved them. Lara nodded once. Then her legs gave out. Torv caught her. He held her against his chest. This small human woman who had done the impossible. Around them, the Lorien soldiers dropped to their knees, not in defeat, in reverence. They knelt for the human who had become something more than human. They knelt for the woman who had stood when all others fell. They knelt for the war god who had saved their world. The war ended 3 weeks after the battle. For the home world, the Ketheri had spent everything on their invasion. When it failed, they had nothing left. Their fleet was shattered, their warriors dead by the millions, their command structure destroyed. They sued for peace, accepting terms they would have rejected. A year ago, the galaxy watched in silence. Lavra spent most of those 3 weeks in a medical pod. Her wounds were severe. The doctors said she should have died at least twice during the battle. They did not understand how she had kept fighting with injuries that would have killed. Valoran warrior, Torv understood. He had learned about human endurance, about the strange resilience that allowed them to push past limits that other species could not imagine. Humans did not know when to quit. It was their greatest weakness and their greatest strength. He sat beside her pod every day, watching her heal, thinking about everything that had happened. He had married her for duty. He had tolerated her for politics. He had respected her for her courage. Now he loved her, not despite what she was, but because of it. Lara woke on the 15th day. She opened her eyes and found Torvek waiting as he always was. How long, she asked. 2 weeks. The war is over. We won. Lara closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet with tears. How many did we lose? Thousands, tens of thousands, but millions more survived. Because of you. Lava did not respond. She lay in silence, and Torvak knew she was thinking about the one she could not save, the faces of the dead, the weight of command. He took her hand. It was small in his fragile and warm. You are not responsible for their deaths, he said softly. You are responsible for the lives you saved. Do not forget that. Lar squeezed his hand but did not speak. When she was strong enough to walk, Torvik took her to their quarters. Rooms that had once felt cold and empty now felt like home. Lara stood at the window, looking out at the city she had saved. The damage from the invasion was still visible. Scars on ancient buildings, gaps where structures had fallen, but the city lived. The people rebuilt. They are calling youth. Torvik said, it is an old word from the founding wars. It means one who stands when all others fall. Lara turned to look at him. I did not stand alone. Your soldiers followed me. They trusted me. They followed you because you earned their trust. You bled with them. You suffered with them. You led them not with words but with actions. That is why they call you war god. Larvara shook her head. I am not a god. I am just a woman who refused to die. That, Torvik said, is exactly what a war god is. The summons from the emperor came 3 days later. Torvik and Lara walked through the ancient halls of the imperial palace, surrounded by guards and nobles and diplomats. The palace had stood for 10,000 years. It had survived invasions and civil wars and the rise and fall of dynasties. Now it would witness something new. The emperor waited in the throne room. He was old, ancient by Valoran standards, but his eyes were sharp and his voice was strong. Larvara Mitchell, he said, you came to our empire as a stranger. You married one of our sons for the sake of peace, and when war came you stood with us. You bled for us. You saved us. Lara bowed her head. I did what anyone would do. No, the emperor said, you did what very few could do, and you did it not for glory or reward, but because it was right. That is the mark of true honor. He gestured, and a servant brought forward a small box. Inside was a symbol Lara did not recognize, a golden emblem shaped like a star. This is the seal of the founding, the emperor explained. It has been given to only 12 individuals in 10,000 years. It grants full citizenship, noble rank, and all the rights and responsibilities of our people. You are the first human to receive it. You will not be the last. Larvara accepted the seal with trembling hands. Around her the assembled nobles and officers applauded, but she did not seem to hear them. She was looking at Torvik, and he was looking at her. 1 week later, Larvara addressed the Galactic Senate. The Great Hall was filled with representatives from 100 species. They had come to hear the human who had turned the tide of a war. They had come to see the woman called Valara. Lara stood at the podium, small and quiet, still bearing scars from the battle. She did not look like a war god. She looked like exactly what she was, a human being, fragile and determined and utterly unbreakable. I am not here to threaten you, she began. I am not here to boast about what I did or what my species can do. I am here to tell you the truth. The hall fell silent. Humans are small. We are weak. We live short lives and die easily. By your standards, we are barely worth noticing, but we have survived on a world that tried to kill us every day for millions of years. We have fought each other and ourselves, and nature itself. We have crawled through ice ages and plagues and wars that nearly destroyed us, and we are still here. She paused, letting the words settle. We do not ask to be feared, we ask to be understood. We are not conquerors, we are survivors. And survivors know that the universe is hostile, that safety is an illusion, that the only way to live is to stand together against the darkness. She looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of species who had dismissed humanity as irrelevant. Earth offers itself not as a master but as a guardian. We will stand with any world that faces extinction. We will fight for any people who cannot fight for themselves. We will give everything we have, including our lives, to protect those who need protection. That is what humans do. That is what we have always done. The Senate was silent for a long moment, then slowly the representatives began to rise. One by one they stood, offering the gesture of respect that crossed all species and all cultures. The Laura Mitchell, the human who had married for duty and become a legend, bowed her head and accepted their honor. That night Torvik found Lara on the balcony of their quarters, looking up at the stars. The Senate voted to grant Earth full membership. He said, humans will serve in the joint military command. Your people will have a voice in galactic affairs. Good, Lara said quietly. That is what I wanted. Torvik stood beside her. Stars stretched above them, endless and cold and beautiful. I married you for duty, he said. I did not expect to love you. Lara smiled. I volunteered for the same reason. I believed in peace. I believed it was worth any sacrifice. And now she turned to face him, the scars on her face caught the starlight. Now I know that some sacrifices give us more than they take. I came here expecting to be alone. I found something worth fighting for. Torvik pulled her close. She rested her head against his chest. This small human woman who had changed everything across the galaxy. The story spread. They told of the human bride who became a war god. They spoke her name in reverence and wonder. They studied her tactics and her courage and her impossible endurance. But on Earth, Lara Mitchell was simply remembered as the woman who showed the universe what humanity could be. And in the years that followed, whenever darkness threatened and hope seemed lost, the galaxy remembered her words. We are survivors, and survivors stand together.